Naomi BRCA-Positive. Jacob collapses as the final secret unravels. On American television's Beyond the Gates, the hour detonates like a fault line finally giving way, and from the very first frame the episode announces that this is not merely a medical revelation but a reckoning stitched together from years of silence, sideways glances, and the quiet terror of inheritance. Because Naomi BRCA sits alone in the genetic counselor's office with a folder so thin it feels insulting, as if a single sheet of paper could carry the weight of a future rewritten, and when the counselor's voice softens and the words BRCA-positive settle into the air like ash, Naomi doesn't cry at first. She calculates. She counts the women she's loved and lost. She hears echoes of whispered diagnoses at family dinners where nobody named the disease. And the camera lingers on her face as understanding clicks into place with an almost audible snap, because suddenly the years of evasive answers, the closed-door arguments, the way her mother flinched at hospital corridors all align into one brutal truth, and Naomi's first instinct is not fear but anger, a white-hot fury that this knowledge was hoarded like a dangerous heirloom, passed down through omission rather than honesty, and when she leaves the office and the sunlight feels too bright, she calls Jacob, her voice steady in that terrifying way that means it's about to break, asking him to come home because they need to talk, now. Immediately, no excuses, and Jacob, who has spent the morning trying to fix a leaking pipe in the guest bathroom as if small repairs could keep larger fractures at bay, hears something in her tone that stops him cold, because Jacob has always been the man who believes love can solve anything, who believes if you show up and stay present the universe will reward you with fairness, and he has been wrong before but never like this. Not like the moment Naomi arrives and doesn't sit down, doesn't take off her coat, just stands there holding the folder like evidence in a trial she never agreed to participate in, and when she says BRCA, Jacob nods too quickly because he knows the word, he knows the statistics, he knows the long nights of chemo and the hollow victories of remission, and for one suspended heartbeat, he thinks the secret is simply bad luck, simply biology, something cruel but impersonal, until Naomi asks the question that splits the room in two, the question she has rehearsed in the car with her hands shaking on the steering wheel, the question that turns a diagnosis into a betrayal. How long did you know? And Jacob's silence answers before he does, because he has known for years. He has known since before they were married, since before promises were made with the confidence of youth, and the camera cuts between their faces as the truth unfolds in jagged pieces, because Jacob didn't just know. He helped keep it quiet. He helped her mother bury the files. He believed he was protecting Naomi from fear, from the paralysis that comes with probabilities, and in that belief he chose control over consent, secrecy over partnership, and when Naomi realizes that the man she trusted most in the world made a decision about her body without her, the floor seems to tilt, and the sound drops out except for her breathing, sharp and uneven, and she laughs once, a brittle sound that scares Jacob more than yelling ever could, because Naomi is the woman who faces storms head-on, who thrives on information, and to deny her that was not love but theft, and as the argument escalates, as words fly and years compress into minutes, the episode weaves in flashbacks of moments that now read differently. The doctor's appointments Jacob insisted on attending, the insurance forms he handled to help, the nights he urged Naomi to sleep instead of Googling symptoms, all revealed now as part of a long, suffocating cover, and Jacob tries to explain. He tries to say he was afraid, that he watched cancer hollow out his own mother and couldn't bear to watch Naomi live with that shadow. But Naomi cuts him off because fear is not a defense, it is a confession, and as she lists the choices she should have had, surveillance, preventative surgery, time, Jacob's knees buckle, literally his body betraying him under the weight of what he's done, and he collapses onto the couch, breath hitching, chest tight, the room spinning as the realization hits him that in trying to save Naomi from pain, he may have doomed their marriage, and the camera doesn't rush to help him. It stays with Naomi, whose instinct to care wars violently with her need to be heard, because this is the cruel irony of the episode, that Naomi is the one facing a life-altering diagnosis, yet Jacob is the one physically breaking, and when he finally gasps out that there is more, that there is one final secret he couldn't bring himself to share, the episode takes its sharpest turn, Because beyond the BRCA mutation lies a deeper, darker truth tied to lineage, consent, and the sins of previous generations. A truth Naomi's mother begged Jacob to protect at all costs, because Naomi's genetic risk is not a random inheritance, but the result of a deliberate decision made decades ago. A fertility clinic cover-up, a donor whose medical history was falsified, a man whose BRCA-positive status was known and ignored in the pursuit of legacy and perfection, and as Jacob confesses that Naomi's biological father is not the man she believed, that her risk profile was altered before she was even born, Naomi's world shatters again, because this isn't just about disease anymore. It's about identity, about the stories we tell ourselves to feel whole. And when she whispers, "So none of it was an accident," the weight of that sentence crushes Jacob completely, his collapse no longer metaphorical but absolute as he slumps forward, tears streaking down his face, apologizing in broken phrases that can't bridge the distance he's created, and the episode cuts between Naomi standing frozen, the house suddenly unfamiliar, and Jacob unraveling. The man who thought he could manage fate discovering that fate does not appreciate being managed, and in the final movements of the hour, beyond the gates does what it does best, expanding the fallout outward like ripples, as Naomi seeks solace not from Jacob but from herself, sitting alone later that night with medical pamphlets spread across the table, making notes, circling options, reclaiming agency one decision at a time, while Jacob, haunted and humbled, calls Naomi's mother and tells her the secret is out, that the gates they built around the truth have finally fallen. And as dawn breaks over Fairmont Crest, the episode closes on Naomi looking at her reflection, touching the scar she does not yet have but may one day choose, a woman standing at the intersection of past deception and future choice, resolute, furious, and unbroken, while Jacob watches from a distance, realizing that love is not about shielding someone from the truth, but trusting them with it, and that some secrets, once unraveled, do not simply collapse a man, they remake a family forever, leaving viewers stunned, emotional, and desperate for what comes. Next on Beyond the Gates. Beyond the Gates doesn't let the devastation breathe quietly for long, because in the aftermath of Jacob's collapse and Naomi's shattering realization, the episode pivots into an even more emotionally ferocious second act where silence becomes the loudest antagonist of all, and the house that once symbolized safety now feels like a museum of lies. Every photo on the wall a carefully curated fiction, every family heirloom suddenly suspect, and Naomi moves through it like a ghost, barefoot on cold floors at 3 a.m, replaying conversations she once trusted, interrogating memories that now feel contaminated, because once the truth fractures, it doesn't break cleanly, it splinters, embedding itself into everything, and when Jacob wakes later in a panic on the couch, clutching his chest and drenched in sweat, the first thing he sees is not Naomi rushing to him, but the empty doorway where she should be, and that absence lands harder than any accusation ever could, because Jacob has always defined himself as her protector, and now he understands with terrifying clarity that he has become the thing she needs protection from, and when he finally finds her in the kitchen at dawn, methodically labeling medical folders, color-coding risk charts like a general planning a war, the sight of her calm terrifies him more than her rage did, because this is Naomi reclaiming control, Naomi becoming unreadable, and when Jacob tries to speak, tries to say her name, she stops him with her raised hand and says quietly, devastatingly, "Not yet," and those two words carve a canyon between them, because they mean this conversation will happen on her terms or not at all, and as the day unfolds, the secret ripples outward despite everyone's best efforts to contain it, because Fairmont Crest has always been a place where truth travels faster than intention, and by lunchtime, whispers are already threading through the Dupree family orbit, glances exchanged at charity luncheons, questions left half-asked, and Naomi's mother, cornered by the inevitability of exposure, finally breaks in a scene that recontextualizes decades of her character, revealing that her choice to conceal Naomi's genetic truth was born not only of fear but of ambition, because in her world, perfection was currency, and a flawed lineage threatened everything she'd built, and when Naomi confronts her, the scene crackles with restrained fury, Not screaming, but surgical honesty. Naomi asking how a mother could gamble with her child's life to protect a reputation, and her mother answering with the devastating admission that she convinced herself she was buying Naomi a normal life, even if it was built on borrowed time, and that confession lands like a betrayal layered atop betrayal, because Naomi realizes she was not just protected but curated, engineered to fit an ideal that never accounted for her right to choose. And while Naomi processes this new rupture, Jacob spirals in parallel, haunted by the knowledge that his love became complicity, that by aligning himself with her mother, he positioned himself outside his marriage without realizing it, and his guilt manifests physically again when he stumbles during a tense encounter with a longtime family friend who hints, too casually, that some secrets are better left buried, and Jacob finally snaps, shouting that secrets rot, that they poison everything they touch, a line that echoes earlier storylines and underscores the show's thesis that denial is the true villain. And as Naomi begins meeting with specialists, discussing mastectomies and timelines and percentages that feel cruelly abstract, the show refuses to sensationalize her medical choices, instead grounding them in her emotional reality, showing her alone in exam rooms, nodding politely while her mind races, then later breaking down in her car where no one can see, gripping the steering wheel and sobbing not out of fear of death, but grief for the life she thought she understood. And when Jacob finally gets his chance to speak, when Naomi sits across from him at the dining table like a judge hearing a case, his apology is stripped of excuses, raw and unadorned, admitting that he was wrong, that love does not grant ownership over another person's future, and though Naomi does not forgive him, she acknowledges his honesty now, telling him that trust, once broken, is not repaired with grand gestures but with patience, transparency, and time he may not be entitled to. And that line devastates Jacob because it introduces the possibility that their marriage, like Naomi's old certainty about her body, may not survive this diagnosis. And in the episode's final moments, as the camera drifts back to Naomi standing before a mirror, imagining scars and strength in equal measure, Beyond the Gates leaves viewers with a haunting image. Naomi placing her hand over her heart, steadying her breath, choosing herself in a world that tried to decide for her, while Jacob watches from the shadows. A man forced to confront that the final secret didn't just unravel a lie, it exposed the fragile truth that love without honesty is just another form of control, setting the stage for a reckoning that will reshape every relationship in Fairmont Crest and redefine what survival really means. Beyond the Gates refuses to let the emotional wreckage settle into something neat or resolvable, instead pressing forward with an almost ruthless intimacy as Naomi's BRCA diagnosis becomes the axis around which every unresolved truth now spins, because once the illusion of safety is shattered, nothing can return to its original shape. And Naomi feels this acutely when she attends her first family gathering after the secret detonates, walking into a room where conversations falter mid-sentence. And sympathy disguises itself as politeness, and she realizes with a sickening clarity that her body has become a topic, her future a speculative exercise for people who once spoke of her only in terms of success and beauty. And when a well-meaning relative murmurs that she's so strong, Naomi nearly recoils, because strength is being imposed on her now just as silence once was. Another expectation she did not consent to, and Jacob, standing across the room, watches her navigate this social minefield with a composure that both awes and devastates him, because he recognizes the distance growing between them is not fueled by anger anymore but by transformation, Naomi evolving into someone forged by truth rather than protected by lies. And when later that night, she tells him she's scheduled further testing and consultations without asking his opinion, he flinches. Not because he disagrees, but because he understands the symbolism. That partnership has shifted, that this is her body and her battle, and any role he plays must now be invited rather than assumed. And the show deepens the emotional stakes by threading in Naomi's private moments of terror. The quiet midnight searches, the moment she deletes her browser history not out of shame but exhaustion, the way she studies women in waiting rooms, wondering who shares her mutation and who has already paid its price. And in one devastating scene, Naomi meets a woman her age who has chosen preventative surgery and speaks calmly about scars as survival marks, and Naomi listens, absorbing not just information but courage, while Jacob, waiting outside, feels useless for the first time in his life. Confronted with the truth that love does not always get a seat in the room where decisions are made, and this helplessness compounds his physical collapse earlier, manifesting now as insomnia, as shaking hands, as the creeping realization that guilt has a longer half-life than fear, and when Jacob finally confronts Naomi's mother alone, demanding to know how she could involve him in such a lie, her response is chillingly honest, telling him that he was chosen because he loved Naomi enough to sacrifice truth for peace, a mirror held up to his worst instincts, and that revelation breaks something open in Jacob, forcing him to confront that his need to be the hero blinded him to Naomi's autonomy. And as the episode arcs toward its close, Beyond the Gates delivers one of its most haunting sequences yet. Naomi standing at the edge of Fairmont Crest at sunrise, watching the gates open and close as residents pass through, a visual metaphor so on the nose it circles back to brilliance. Because Naomi now understands that gates are not just barriers but decisions, choices about what we let in and what we keep out, and she whispers to herself that she will not gatekeep her own truth anymore, not for love, not for legacy, not for fear. And when Jacob joins her, tentative, respectful, not touching her unless she allows it, the silence between them speaks louder than any reconciliation could. Because this is not a love story rushing toward repair, but a reckoning unfolding in real time, messy and unresolved, and the episode ends not with closure but with possibility, Naomi stepping forward into a future defined by informed choice, and Jacob standing behind her, humbled, uncertain if he will be invited to walk beside her, as Beyond the Gates dares its audience to sit with discomfort, to question the morality of protection without permission, and to recognize that sometimes the most devastating inheritance is not a gene, but the belief that truth is too dangerous to share. Beyond the Gates continues to press on the bruise rather than soothe it, widening the lens to show how Naomi's BRCA revelation doesn't exist in isolation but acts like a solvent, dissolving long-standing power structures, alliances, and self-deceptions throughout Fairmont Crest. Because once Naomi begins speaking openly, carefully, selectively, but openly, the narrative gravity shifts, and people who once controlled the story scramble to regain footing, beginning with Naomi's mother, who realizes too late that secrecy only works when the protected party remains compliant, and Naomi is no longer that woman, and this terrifies her mother more than any scandal ever could, because Naomi's refusal to be quiet threatens to expose not just one lie, but an entire philosophy built on image over integrity. And this tension explodes in a private confrontation where Naomi calmly informs her mother that she has requested the full fertility clinic records, not out of vengeance but necessity. Because informed consent begins with complete truth, and the look on her mother's face is not anger but panic, the dawning realization that the past is no longer locked safely away. And while this battle unfolds, Jacob's collapse reverberates outward in subtler ways, because Fairmont Crest has always respected strength, and seeing Jacob shaken, unsteady, openly remorseful destabilizes his standing, turning him from quiet authority into a cautionary figure, and he feels it in the way people speak around him instead of to him, the way invitations dry up, the way his opinions are suddenly met with silence, and this social exile becomes its own reckoning, forcing Jacob to confront how much of his identity was rooted not just in love for Naomi, but in control masquerading as caretaking. And when he attends therapy, alone, at Naomi's insistence, the show strips away any lingering hero narrative, presenting a man learning, painfully late, that good intentions do not absolve harmful choices. And the therapy scenes are raw, unglamorous, Jacob struggling to articulate the moment he decided secrecy was love, realizing it was easier to manage Naomi's future than sit with his own fear of loss. And as Jacob unravels inwardly, Naomi builds outward, assembling a new support system that does not revolve around marriage or legacy but honesty and mutual respect, confiding in friends who don't rush to reassure her, who allow her anger without trying to soften it. And these moments are quietly revolutionary, because they show Naomi choosing relationships that honor her autonomy rather than soothe other people's discomfort. And the show underscores this shift with visual language. Naomi framed alone but centered, no longer shot through doorways or over shoulders, but head-on, fully present in her own story, and when the topic of preventative surgery becomes imminent rather than theoretical, Beyond the Gates handles it with devastating restraint, allowing Naomi to voice conflicting truths without resolving them, that she wants to live, that she fears losing parts of herself society has taught her to equate with worth, that she resents having to be brave at all, and when Jacob offers to attend an appointment with her, not assuming, but asking, Naomi pauses long enough to remind him that presence is not penance, that support is not owed forgiveness, and this moment, small and quiet, lands harder than any explosive confrontation because it establishes new rules of engagement. And as rumors finally break into public scandal, whispers of clinic fraud, manipulated genetic histories, powerful families buying silence, the gates of Fairmont Crest